episode 3 of my spiritually inspired conversations series. Today, I am so excited to introduce all of you to my friend Tony. And Tony and I have this shared interest in astrology, and we have a few shared aspects in our chart, including the one that we're going to be talking about today, which is that we both have our natal moon in our 7th whole sign house. We're going to be talking a little bit about our journeys with astrology. We're going to talk about significations of the moon, significations of the 7th house, and we're going to offer some advice and reflections on managing your life with this placement and living like a deep, fulfilling, soul-inspired life. So we're so excited to have you all here listening today, and let's jump right in. Tony, welcome.
Hello, Maya.
So Tony, I thought we would start today by talking a little bit about astrology itself and kind of like our approach and what led us to become interested. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey with astrology and kind of what sparked your interest?
My interest really started when I was a child, and would just see the moon, and trying to figure out what this thing is. Like, one of my earliest memories is I was either in a car or a train, I can't remember where, but and getting freaked out that the moon like was following us, like because you see everything else going by real fast in the on the landscape except for the moon. It's like right there. Over the course of time, like I started learning that there's other things up there like planets, and then also from my culture, my grandfather saying, oh, the moon has a beard, that means it's going to be nice weather tomorrow or something. They're able to take information from the sky and predict things. And I found that fascinating. I'm like, well, how do you know? I became fascinated with that to the point where, flash forward, was just becoming a teenager, and I finally got a library card. The first thing I did was I went to the library and I got a book out on astrology. But it actually showed you how to draw a natal chart. This was back before computers and stuff like that. So like you had to draw a circle and do all this math, sine and cosine and all this trigonometry and stuff, which I was terrible at. I think I looked back, I still have the notebook I did this in. I think I was off from my ascendant by like 11 degrees or something like that. But nonetheless, it got me really interested, and I just pretty much devoured everything I got my hands on.
Yeah, that is amazing that you actually sat down as basically a child, and you actually like drew your chart by hand using mathematical formulas to calculate the ascendant sign. And I think that you're kind of like a born astrologer when you contemplate the planets by actually looking up in the sky and feeling into it. Modern astrology has become this sort of psychological practice, but it's actually all based on thousands of years of observations of worldly events based on the movement of the planets as observed with people's eyes and with telescopes. And there must have been a part of you, Tony, who had like a past life as an astrologer or something. Something was sparked when you saw the moon again. I had a similar peak experience on Christmas Eve of gazing up at a full moon. It's like a red moon, and being able to feel that something about the energy was fully expressing itself in that moment, like something had come to fruition. And I wondered if there was a connection between that and the moon. And then as time went on, like as a little girl, I think like most of us, I discovered the sun signs, and I would sit and I would think about like everyone that I knew who was a Taurus, or like everybody that I knew who was a Leo and stuff. And I would try to think like, what is the core essence that sort of like links all of these different people? As when we first discover astrology, a lot of people sort of discover the sun first, but actually the moon is just as significant for someone's like core demeanor as the sun is. And for about half of all people on the planet, anybody who was sort of born after dark, like if you yourself were actually born at night when it was dark or the sun was setting, then the moon itself is actually your primary luminary and can give you a greater sense of like who you are than your natal sun even. Tony, do you remember like the first time that you began to learn about the significations of your own natal moon?
My natal moon's in Capricorn and everything else is in Sagittarius. Moon in Capricorn, very practical, cold, things of that nature. And I'm like, no, this isn't me at all. And what is this? There's something else going on here. And what I realized was that you had to like make more of a synthesis between your rising sign, your sun, and the moon for it to actually really make sense. You know, because to talk about like a moon sign or something like that in general is just, I don't know how people would even begin to approach it like that. You know, you got to take your time with it to really get in there and discover where it is in your chart, sign and house, and then how it just relates to it. And then how do you relate to that information as you're getting it? It's well worth the time to investigate.
Yeah. And one of the beautiful things about astrology, right, is that we never have it all figured out. The moon is our sort of quickest moving planetary body. And so everyone experiences the moon's movement through their chart every 28 and a half days. And like you said, like the moon here on planet Earth, it helps dictate the tides for women, like it helps dictate our menstrual cycles. Like we're deeply connected to the moon. All of us who have this like moon in the 7th house are even more connected. At first, we probably don't realize that we are. And that's sort of part of the 7th house significations. Like it's often a part of ourself that's hidden from ourselves. But I think the journey of discovering our moon is a beautiful one. And it's one that helps to sort of bring us in connection to our soul. So if you're unfamiliar with kind of the moon and what it represents in astrology, there are so many different opinions about this, and anybody can Google. And a lot of times, like if you do Google the moon in astrology or you do a cursory search, one of the first things that you'll actually find is that the moon represents your mother. I remember coming across that pretty early on when I was researching the moon. And for me, that one didn't make a lot of sense to me. My moon's in the 7th house, but it's also in the sign of Pisces. And my mom is like a triple Virgo. She has like, and she actually has like North Node in the 6th house, and she's got like her Sun, Mercury, Venus in Virgo, and really isn't Piscean at all. So immediately, the first things that I found about moon in the 7th house, they did not fully resonate. And I'm actually glad, because it sort of made me dig a little bit deeper. Do you feel like your mother is reflected by your moon in Capricorn, moon in the 7th house?
No, not really. It's my mother's is about as Aquarius as can be. You know, it's because 7th house is a sign of like another person. Your first real other connection, obviously, is your mother. People put too much on that.
I think that our logical brains want to say, the moon, it's your mother, or it's your wife, or Saturn is your father, or it's your grandfather. So I think as a starting place, these things can be helpful because we all have a shared human understanding of like, what does a mother feel like? But I think we must keep in mind that it's really like the archetypal like feeling of the mother that can help us like get in touch with the energy of the moon. And I remember when I was reflecting on my own natal moon and my relationship with my mother, what I realized pretty quickly and like pretty early on was like, it wasn't what she was, but it was what I wished that she would be. It was like the type,
Uh,
like that energy of Pisces, that energy of seventh house, like that feeling of like oneness and connection and the spiritual link. Like these were all things like I wished that my mother was someone who had that deep faith in a higher power. At different times, I almost like projected those qualities onto her. What was there for me was the longings like of my own heart. And I think especially like when it comes to a moon that's placed in the seventh house, it can tell us like something about almost like that like deep craving of our heart, what we're looking for perhaps in other people. And a big picture level, like houses can become understood in relation to their opposites. So the opposite of the seventh house is the first house. And this is our first house. Like it represents like the first way that we understand ourselves, who we are, and our identity, our face, the discovery that we are a self at all, really. The seventh house is opposite to this, and it represents the place in our chart where we find other people. So it represents the significant relationships in our life, like particularly the one-on-one relationships. I actually, about a year ago, I had a reading with Brian Kotler. Some of you might be familiar with him. And he described like the seventh house as being the people that we can count on one hand. Really those people who really know you, that you can like really be yourself with. And I think the reason why it's those people is because the seventh house shows us almost the part of ourself that we are when we're really truly comfortable. In modern astrology, people often look to like the first house, which again is the opposite of the seventh house, as being like, some people call that sign that rules the first house, which is our ascendant sign, like a mask. Like it's almost like a false self. And if you think of it that way, if you choose to think of it that way, you could think of the seventh house, the sign that rules the seventh house, and planets there like the moon, as perhaps representing the authentic self, or this deeper part of ourself that we often discover a little bit later on. And I wonder, like for you, Tony, when did you discover that these moon qualities were a significant part of you?
I guess probably after I started journal writing and learning about like what projections were. Like, why would these people you can count on one hand, be so significant to you? These are places you can throw a positive projection. I mean, I know people talk about projection like it's always a negative projection, but there are positive projections. But as time goes on, if you realize that that's a positive projection, that you're projecting onto people that, you're close with, or you want to be close with, or you feel comfortable around, there's the process of actually reining that in and starting to assimilate that. And when I would originally look at like Capricorn type people, once again, like the book says, oh, cold, and they're just too practical. They don't know how to have fun. They just always want to work. I was realizing that that was negative projection. And the more I actually
Mm.
would assimilate some of these qualities, what are we doing here to bring this other energy in as opposed to reject it? Often takes a long time to stop seeing that opposite energy as something bad or something so good that it's out of reach. Because the other part of that is like, oh, I'll never be like hardworking like these people. Somehow you have to learn to say, no, that is part of me. When your moon is in the seventh and Capricorn, there's a tendency towards, I don't want to be cold. So, I have to be overly warm, overly generous. And rejecting that part of like, well, if I say no to somebody, that's being cold. I got to say no because I have to go take care of something for myself. No, that's being too practical. You should really be more nurturing, like the Cancer
Mm-hmm.
sign. So, understanding that it's like, no, you need both. You need to have, the fortitude to say no when practical matters need to be handled. And you also, don't give up your rising sign. You could still be nurturing, but there's a way to do both.
Well, I think as we mature, we begin to find our way to balance like the first and seventh houses. And especially this has been such a core component of my own journey because I have not only the moon in the seventh house, but I have the north node, south node axis on like first house, seventh house. And I think for anybody who has their moon in the seventh house, we're learning how to seek nurturance with other people and how to emotionally connect with other people and how to maintain boundaries ourselves. And I think this is meant to be sort of an ongoing negotiation throughout our life. But I love what you said about how we sort of have to come to a place of understanding that these qualities that we first see in other people are a part of ourself, because most of us, whether it's through our early childhood upbringing, the way friends interact with us, family, we're taught to believe at first in our childhood that we are our ascendant sign. So you might have first like discovered the sort of like Cancer part of yourself. I first discovered like the Virgo part of myself. And in my early life, I noticed that the people who were coming to me like were colored by the sign ruling my seventh house, which was Pisces. And I noticed that they were all moon-like. So I would say to myself, I'd be like, and I really noticed, I was like, wow, all these people that want to be my friends, all of them are so emotional. They're so dreamy. I was always like, oh, everybody else, like, they're always the criers. And they were like growing up, all of my friends, they were always the ones that were so sensitive. They could almost hardly handle like being in the world, like when we were in elementary school, they would cry for their moms like every single day. And then as I got older, all of my friends were always like artists. They were always musicians. They were always dreamers. They were always telling me, oh, just relax, like just have faith. Everything turns out how it's meant to. And I noticed within them these qualities of my seventh house, these qualities of my moon. But it really wasn't until like my seventh house annual perfection year, like when I was 30, that I really began to understand that these qualities were also within me. That'll probably surprise some of you who follow my work to hear that, because a lot of you probably see these Pisces qualities within me or these like moon qualities within me. And at this point now, I really claimed it. And this has been a part of me coming into my wholeness, to the point that I even have this huge like high priestess wall hanging in my bedroom and all kinds of stuff. And I celebrated, and I actually, like, even in this moment, like, I'm wearing like an astrology necklace of the moon. And I've learned that these qualities can be beautiful and can be wonderful and can be warm. And I've learned to sort of embrace like the divine feminine energy. But like you said, I think it's a pretty typical experience at first to feel like that which is in our seventh house. So, like in your case, not only the moon, but also like Venus and the qualities of Capricorn, that's other people. And for me, like that, like Piscean quality, that's other people. And if you're listening and you have your own moon in the seventh house, I think your soul's evolutionary journey is asking you to sort of get in touch with that very sensitive, deep feeling part of yourself that you might have felt possibly like you may have had to hide in various different ways, or perhaps that you've seen reflected in other people. And I think if you have like the moon in the seventh house, there is this part of you that is probably so inspired by these moon like qualities. Like, I'm just like reflecting on this and everybody that I know that has this placement. And I think we are deep feelers. A lot of us are empaths. I think a lot of us are drawn to music. I think a lot of us are drawn to the arts. I think a lot of us want to perhaps like follow the moon in some way, follow the moon cycles. I wonder, Tony, like, do you have any moon-based practices?
Every morning when I get up and write in my dream journal, and dreams are a moon-based practice right there,
Mm-hmm.
I go to astro.com, I look up the moon position. I want to know what house it's in. I want to know what sign it's in today. That's like the first thing I even document.
Yeah, I love that you do that. Like, I love that you journal your dreams. I love that you follow the position of the moon and transits of the moon through your chart. For anybody who's listening today, let us know what kind of moon practices that you follow in the comments below. For me, I just kind of take it all for granted, I guess, but I'm the same way. I became fascinated as soon as I really began to learn about astrological transits. I became most fascinated in the movements of the moon. And once I came to understand the transits of the moon through my chart, I really began to know on a very deep level that, first of all, fate was real and destiny was real, because I would see like the moon moving through different places in my chart, and I would see the events of my life reflecting the movement of the moon through my chart. And some of my first moon-based practices, I guess, like years ago, I would do actual like rituals at the new moon, you know, with candles and crystals, and set intentions and bury the intentions, and then, you know, see them come to fruition sometimes 2 weeks later at the full moon, or sometimes 6 months later. And so that was the beginning. As time went on, I started fasting, like during the new moon and the full moon, to sort of like literally, it sounds strange to say, but kind of like bathe in the moon's energies and deeply introspect at those times. I've
Mhm.
noticed even when I don't plan to do so, I seem to always be out on a late night walk at the full moon every month, like literally every month. Like, it's not planned, but it's like a calling. Like, I'm called to be under the moon somehow, some way. It always happens. And I'm sure some of you can relate to that as well. Many of us that have prominent moons, and a seventh house moon, I think fundamentally is a prominent moon because you have your moon on one of the angles.
Mhm.
I think that it's not uncommon under the full moon to not be able to sleep. But I think that's, in a way, it's like the moon calling us to connect with it a little bit more. And you said you look up like the moon's placement on astro.com. I constantly look up, like I'm trying to withhold looking at it right now. Like I know as we're recording this, like the moon is in Leo. I must look to like see the exact degree, but I on average actually like looked at my search history. I on average go to the website currentplanetarypositions.com. Oh my gosh, 14 degrees. I knew it. Like, oh, this is such a perfect moon placement for your chart. Like, okay. Oh my gosh. I love it so much. 14 degrees of Leo. Yes. Like, and it's an aspect to Uranus and everything. Oh, you guys, you can tell, like, I really do. Like, I tell everyone where the moon is all of the time. But anyway, so on an average day, I look at the position of the moon 13 times. Some days it's more, recently the moon has been making aspects to Pluto whenever it gets in the late degrees. And I literally feel that in my body. I feel every time that the moon comes in aspect to different places in my own natal chart. And for a while, I would resist that. I would kind of like resist these different moon-based experiences and the sensitivities. I learned to sort of like let the moon be my guide and flow with the energies. So if the moon is in a positive aspect, like a sextile or trine, like with Neptune or something like that, I learned to like dream. I learned to let myself go there. I learned to listen to the fantasy music and things like that. And when the moon is in aspect to Mars, like I learned to let that fire sort of like flow through me, or all of these different things. But yeah, I think when you do have this placement, or just anybody who's just interested in the moon in general, letting the moon be kind of like a spiritual guide to you. I mean, it's a luminary. It is a reflector of light. And I think those of us who have a very deep interest in astrology, I think the moon can inspire endless wisdom from within us, and it can reflect to us so many aspects of ourself. Working with the energy of the moon has enriched our lives a lot. So now I'm always thinking, okay, where is the moon in my chart at any given time? And I'm allowing myself to cultivate that area of my life. So if the moon is transiting through the third house, for example, I know, okay, this is one of the best times for me to take a pause and connect with my sister, for example, the third house being in connection to siblings. Allowing the moon to sort of inform my life events has only made my life better. So I definitely encourage people to work with the moon energy in that way.
You just touched on right there, like one of the most ancient uses of astrology. When the moon is waxing, they say that those are good time to plant plants. Those are the good times if you want your hair to grow, that's the best time to cut it. If you don't want your hair to not grow and the moon is waning, they did. This was what it was actually, used for by people for thousands of years.
It's easy to get disconnected with the computers and things like that, and just to identify with the words on the screen, that say the moon is emotions, moon is your mother. But if you take a step back and you look in the sky and you still yourself enough to actually feel your own experience of the moon and learn to like work with its cycles, you'll discover that in many ways it's kind of like ineffable. It's very difficult to put into word the moon's energy, but you almost don't even need to like understand it intellectually in order to work with it. Initially in time, they trusted, they observed, if we plant the seeds at this time, the crops grow stronger. Now we can look in our books, we can look on the computer, but if we can do that, like, and we can look up in the sky and we can align with the ancient roots like of astrology, then I think we're really getting like the best of both worlds.
I agree. If I may make a suggestion, all of us who are listening that actually have a natal moon in the seventh house, basically that means the moon was on the horizon in the west when we were born. If you're lucky enough to have access to, a, a, a flat plains area or a seaside or something like that, if you're able to even make the journey to it, when the moon is going to be setting, look at the moon, while it's setting, because that's where it was when we were born. I was born, it was a crescent moon. Just, imagine it, what it might have looked like when you were born in the sky. That in and of itself will trigger a real reaction in the core as to something about who you are. And if you can journal about it, and if you can remember your dream that night when you do it, and are able to write it down, this is going to be a lot of useful information for you, because that's a real connection to your both instinctual energy on one hand and your intuitive energy on the other.
Absolutely. Tony, I guess when you think about having your moon in the seventh house, what first comes to mind, I guess, about how this has shaped you in relationship with other people?
Keeping in with the, with the theory that, you're attracting other people into your life for a reason, and these people are a reflection of you, both positive and negative. At times when you begin to rub up against people, this is still saying a lot about you. And not that the person, while whatever the person's saying or doing to you is your fault, or you're the blame for whatever's going on. It's just that, you're recognizing something, what is really going on over here. This person doesn't actually want to hurt me. you know there's something, there's a lesson to be learned here, both about, externally about the situation and the other person, but also about yourself. It's more rewarding to act in that way and step away from more of the more instinctual reactions of the moon, which is, now it's either time to fight or flight, cave in and please the other person, or automatically go head to head because this person is a threat. And more understanding it as, this is all still a part of you, without, blame or judgment about yourself or the other person. And if you could step back for a moment and just understand that for a moment, and then proceed on to whatever the situation for you is calling for.
Yeah, definitely. You touched on two things that really feel potent. I think one thing that's sort of unspoken in what you're saying is that if you have a seventh house moon, fundamentally, those one-on-one relationships with other people are going to be deeply emotionally evocative for you. They're going to bring you in touch with some core aspects of who you are and your soul. And I think we have to just allow this to be when we
Mhm.
have this sort of placement. I think one of the ways I first discovered or understood my moon in the seventh house was this feeling of emotional pull towards other people. So I didn't know why this was, but I just knew that I always felt most at home in life if I had that one special other person in my life. I felt more sort of at ease. I felt more safe in life, whether that person was the mother, or that person was a best, girlfriend, or that person was a lover, or whoever that person was. And I think with moon in the seventh house, we can be so sensitive to the other person sometimes that we could even get averse and be like, oh, it's easier just to be with myself, in life sometimes. But Tony's talking about, inviting that sensitivity to the other person, inviting in that deep emotional engagement with someone else, and realizing that whatever that person is reflecting back to us has something to show us about perhaps our own longings deep within, or our own emotions. And I think for everyone with moon in the seventh house, we fundamentally are not meant to go it alone in life. And we're like learning and growing through these like deep emotional engagements and enmeshments with other people. And we fundamentally are going to be more psychically linked to, or more sensitive to, more clairsentient with those special people in our lives, those that we're engaging with in a one-on-one basis. And you kind of touched on this, Tony. It's like whether we experience this as a positive or a negative is largely a matter of personal perspective. Some of us feel like we're a victim of other people because we're experiencing those other people's moods like really, really intensely. We can almost experience ourselves like a victim and feeling like I feel overstimulated, I feel overwhelmed by the other people. Having that moon in the seventh house allows for a deeper connection, and it allows like relationships themselves to become like a spiritual practice. And it allows me to experience like the world of that other person as if it's my own. And as a result of that, I'm able to sort of just like shore up all these different life experiences. When I was younger, I experienced the moon qualities of the other people as something that I was judging and something I didn't want near me. But as time has gone on, I've learned to reach for people in my life who have the higher qualities of the moon as part of their character. Early on in life, we can experience some of like the quote, like more problematic or lower significations of the moon. And I think you're kind of in this terrain if you're drawing to a lot of people who maybe have difficulties, with alcohol or with drugs or with facing daily life or handling their emotions. Maybe they have a lower emotional intelligence or things like that. But as we cultivate the moon qualities at the higher spiritual levels, then we begin to like draw to ourselves people who are expressing the higher qualities of the moon, like these beautiful sort of like divine feminine, perhaps, or maternal qualities, or artistic qualities, or these intuitive qualities, this like beautiful clairsentient like type of qualities. And so for someone with the moon in the seventh house, like the more that you learn about the moon and you learn about the placement of the moon and in the sign, like ruling your seventh house and things like that, and the more that you reach for like the highest aspects of those moon qualities within yourself, the more that you'll see the other people that you draw to you in the most positive light, and probably the higher quality people that you actually will draw to yourself. Has that been your experience in some way, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. You could study astrology or not. One way or another, if you happen to have moon in the seventh house, the close people you bring into your life are going to teach you about yourself. When you were saying before about feeling the need to have a partner, whether it's your mother or a best friend or in a romantic relationship, that's the guidance. That's going to be the best way you learn. You could jumpstart that a bit, find out something about your moon sign, find out where whatever the ruler of that sign is, where that is in your chart. If it's Pisces, the traditional ruler was Jupiter. Where's Jupiter in your chart? These are going to say some things: what sign, what house, Mars for Aries, etc. These things are going to start to uncover some layers about yourself that you might not have been aware of. And those are interesting to explore and to meditate upon. But even without any of that, the other close people in your life are going to teach you about you. So that's, I think, the main reason that it's important to have them in your life, so long as you're conscious not to make your own self-worth reliant on these other people, because that's a trap that we can get ourselves into, moon in the seventh house people, because they are such a reflection of us.
I really want to underscore that point that, like, if you do have your moon in the seventh house, your emotional spiritual development in this life is going to be catalyzed by other people. And we need to not take this for granted because this isn't necessarily true for everyone. So, for example, if you have a partner or you have a best friend and their, natal moon is in the 5th house, their emotional development in this life may be much more tied to the expressions of their creativity, for example, or those things that bring them pleasure. Or if someone has their moon in the 9th house, their emotional evolution and their journey and development in that way may be one that is more sparked by travel or by meditation or pursuits of higher education. But for us, with the moon in the 7th house, our emotional spiritual development is absolutely going to be through the process of engaging deeply in one-on-one relationship with other people. And it can feel so potent, and we can be so affected by these other people that, just like you said, we can sometimes, especially earlier on in the journey, we can almost feel like who we are, like our actual sort of like worth is in that other person. Like we can almost begin to become like reliant on that. And I think that can sneak in a little bit. It can sort of sneak in behind the scenes where it's like maybe we get in a new relationship or we meet a new friend and they're like our best friend. And suddenly we feel really great about ourselves because we're so emotionally enmeshed, like with that other person. It's like, ooh, I have this great person in my life. Everything's great. Everything's good. But like with moon in the 7th house, what happens if that person goes away, as they so often do? So many of our human relationships are transitory.
This other person's in your life for a reason. You're in a relationship. You're relating to the other person just as much as you're relating to yourself. This moon and 7th house people are, everything that you said, very emotionally attracted to other people. It's just in the nature. We can feel very high highs and low lows because of that. Now, there's nothing really wrong with that. There's some people who like roller coasters. They're fun in a way, but it's you get you're able to see this or even predict it sometimes. I mean, and this is like where some of the astrology actually comes in to start to help here, because a lot of what we were talking about, once again, we could have figured out on our own eventually, through introspection. But astrology could help us, like, as a bit of a clock or a timepiece, knowing where, times that you may be triggered when the moon's in your 5th. It's times of should be great joy, and not to be disappointed if they're not. It's just the opportunity is there. When the moon's in your 12th, you may have some very interesting dreams or insights. And when the moon is in your 7th, you may feel strongly attracted to a person you just meet. It's good to be aware of these things. It's nice to dive into a situation, but it's also nice to actually know where you are too. I like to dive into the ocean, but not into the middle of the ocean.
Yes, exactly. That's why, I think both of us in our own ways, like we love astrology because it can tell us where we are and give us insight sort of into where we're going. And that's especially true like when the transiting moon is returning to the sign that it was at when we were born. Often that can bring a new person into our life, and that can change our entire feeling of our experience of life itself. And that's one of the greatest benefits, I think, of the moon in the 7th house. What do you think would be some advice that you might give to a person who has their moon in the 7th house and they're just trying to find their way? Like if you could give one piece of advice to a moon in the 7th house person, no matter what sign, what would you tell that person?
I would say pick up that book that you did the review on, Sensitive is the New Strong. You might not be an empath, but it would help you understand some of how you may relate to other people. And there's some great exercises in that book for when you are feeling ungrounded or let's say, too attached to another person or not attached enough, or just having a rough time of it in regards to other people. If you can, write down your dreams and journal honestly. Even if you just shred the journal as soon as it's done,
I always go and I look for beautiful journals that inspire me. It's sort of like almost on my shopping list. That's the extent to which which I'm always like kind of looking, and on a daily basis, I'll write down, oh, this inspiration, this intuition, this dream, and things like that. And it somehow gets like out of me these deep intuitive impressions and sparks that also often come from the other people in my life and things like that. And then I do keep them, but I rarely look back. I actually have like a bookshelf in my entryway, and all of these beautiful journals from the past are there. From time to time, when the moon is in significant aspect, I might pull one off the shelf and look back. And it's amazing to see how all these different people have like come into my life and sparked my development in these different ways. And yeah, journaling is an awesome tip. And I did not expect you to say read Sensitive is the New Strong, but that makes perfect sense because that book, it is of course one that I love and I've made videos on, but it does help us negotiate our relationships with other people. I think I would say learn about healthy relationship, whether it's from Sensitive is the New Strong or from seminars or other books, because the health of your relationships is going to dictate your own wellness within. It's really going to affect your emotional wellness. And moon in the seventh house, like, you're not meant to go it alone. So somehow, some way, you've got to learn to deeply engage with other people in a healthy way. And I had mentioned earlier in this discussion, I mentioned that I got a reading with Brian Kotler, and that was the most recent astrology reading that I got. And I remember he said of like moon in the seventh house, said like a quote that has just stuck in my mind every single day. He said, "You're here learning learning trust in other people, not learning
Mm,
how to trust, but learning who to trust." And he said, if you were to trust more, that would be like a death sentence. Like moon in the seventh house, like often we think, I need to trust more, I need to open up more. And he's not, he said, it's not about learning to do more or trust more in other people, but learning the wisdom of who to open your heart to and who to give your trust to. And he said, like, that is a blood sport. Learning about healthy relationships, learning about signs of like red flags in relationships, and learning to honor and value ourselves. I think that that's so essential. And that's a big part of the message of like Sensitive is the New Strong, is learning to value ourselves. Yes, those that we draw to us with moon in the seventh house, they're going to represent our shadow in some way, but learning to choose and be selective with bringing to us those who represent those aspects of ourselves that we are most like seeking to cultivate, and not like getting down on ourselves. When we do that, I think with moon in the seventh house, we can draw to ourselves those who represent kind of like our lower nature. And indeed, there's learning in all things. But I would say be very, very cognizant of who you give your trust to and who you kind of like let into your heart. But yeah, somehow the time has gotten away from us. Those of you who study astrology know the wisdom of the stars is never ending. Many of the great astrologers will tell you that you cannot even learn astrology in one life. It takes many lives. There's so many layers. For the sake of time, I wonder if you have any closing thoughts.
I think we covered quite a bit of it. I just want to make sure anybody listening who happens to be alone right now, and this isn't necessarily just in a romantic partnership, it's also close friends. But sometimes, especially now with the lockdown and things like that, people feeling isolated. That's not a mark on your character if right now you feel like you have no close relationships, friendships, or romantic relationships, or whatever. The moon has phases. Sometimes the new moon is there. You can't see it. That's what it means. It's just take that time for reflection and to develop anything that you're wanting to do with that alone time, because moon and seventh house people, there's going to be more than enough people around eventually. Enjoy that time that you have.
That's so true. Yeah, going it alone is a part of this. I spend at least like one week every month totally alone and I don't talk to anyone. And when we're alone with moon in the 7th house, that's our time to work on our intuition. But truly also understanding that we're never really alone. I think with moon in the 7th house, it's better to be on your own than be in an unhealthy relationship. But even when we're technically on our own, like during COVID, maybe you're alone in your bedroom right now or in your office or something like that, we're still deeply impacted by other people. Like you could be listening today and you could be deeply impacted by Tony or by myself or by the author of a book that you so happen to be reading or someone you pass on the street. And so just know that with moon in the 7th house, you have that ability to have deep insight and transformative experiences as a result of other people, even if, like Tony said, right now you're not partnered. So hold out for those people who are truly like worthy of your trust and worthy of your love. And when they're in your life as a friend or a family member or a romantic partner, things like that, really seek to cultivate the most deeply intuitively connected, healthy and strong relationships that you can, because that's how your soul is learning and growing in this life. Thank you all for joining us today for this discussion on having your natal moon in the 7th house. It's been so wonderful to spend this time with you today. And if you are interested in learning more about astrology or hearing from Tony or myself about other aspects in your chart, please let us know by asking your astrology questions in the comments below. So once again, thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you for joining us.
Many blessings to all of you today and namaste.